We will burn your huts, but we will let you live. If you will concede defeat.
There's no way I can concede defeat. Any of my men could beat any of your men any day of the week.
Sounds like a wager. Gentlemen, what do you reckon?
Come on, you want to show them how an Englishman fights?
I'll show. And the volley. Your choice of weapons.
Life for the Old English in their era was undeniably tough. The lifestyle and means of survival employed over 1,000 years ago seems a world away from the technological and developmental comforts we know today. Particularly in the area of healing, where we now have the NHS prescription drugs and advanced medical care, the Old English would have relied on much more primal methods and techniques. However, it should be considered that we have more in common with our ancestors than we believe. This report aims to explore some of the ailments and diseases recorded in their era, along with respective methods of treatment and prevention, and compare this to what we now know today about the theories of old age healers. Healing is one of the aspects of early English life that is most difficult to study, not only due to the preservation of materials, organic and otherwise, in grave findings, but also due to the tendency of communities of the age to pass information by mouth rather than written record. Notions such as eating chicken soup when plagued by a cold, now referred to as old wives' tales or remedies, appeared to be common advice that came from no written source.
However, what the Old English healers left behind for us is sufficient to gain a pretty good insight into some of the general methods of treatment for the most common of ailments.
Verbs for the word heal in Old English. One, lacian, derived from the word lace, and the other, lacian, from noun lac. And presumably it was whence came the Old English noun for a healer, a leech. The leech was likely to have taken his craft as an occupation, with sources suggesting that large sums of money had been passed in exchange for their services. We can assume that only those with money to offer, or a high standing in the social hierarchy, would have been able to afford personal healing. Circumstances for children, the slave class known as thralls, would have been undoubtedly much grimmer. It is unclear from evidence whether leechcraft was a taught profession in the Viking era, although it is more possible that many healers learned their techniques from observing the natural survival instincts of cattle and other animals. For example, horses were known to chew tree bark in order to induce vomiting upon falling ill, and these behaviours may have influenced the study of herbal cures. Probably the easiest of all infirmities to diagnose, and probably one of the most common to be treated, would be the battle-sustained wound. Countless tales and sagas speak of great warriors going to war, and communities would have kept a combat-ready army at all times. Although heavy armour and head protection was worn upon the battlefield, studies of remains have revealed that wounds from combat, both fatal and non-fatal, were not uncommon at all. A large range of weapons were believed to have been used by the Norse warrior, alongside a round wooden shield as the primary means of protection.
The most common of instruments was the scrampsax, meaning short knife. This was not only a weapon, but also a tool, and many non-combatants within the camp would own one, as well as close combat warriors.
Although the scrampsax was by no means the most deadly of weapons, it may have been responsible for percussive injuries through chainmail, such as the chip in this bone, and would have been capable of slicing through unprotected flesh. The langsax, meaning longsword, and other broadswords were the primary weaponry of Viking warriors. Up to 1 metre in length, they may have been single or double-bladed with major harming potential. According to Dark Age Warrior by Ewart Oakeshott, remains show thigh bones cut through as clean as a whistle, and there was a skeleton found in Gothland with both legs clean cut off below the knee with one stroke. Polearm weapons, such as spears, were common amongst lower-ranking combatants, and were generally used as thrusting or throwing weapons, making up a vast number of weapons on the battlefield. The Lacknunga manuscript, a priceless source of knowledge from the Viking era, suggests a well-studied remedy for a sudden stitch, with a heroic charm calling out,
"Out, little spear, if it be in here. Out, spear, be not in, spear."
This metaphor, along with the sheer numbers of spears found in archaeology, suggests that the weapon was more likely to wound than to kill. Most commonly associated with Viking warfare is the axe, of which there are many varieties, including the hand axe, the hand-and-a-half axe, and the full-size Dane axe. A well-placed blow from a pole axe would have been more than capable of crushing or slicing cleanly through a skull or any other bone. This head wound, where the entire top portion of the skull has been removed, was thought to have been courtesy of either an axe or a broadsword, and the Dane axe was certainly capable of slicing a Viking cleanly in two. From studies of works such as the Lacknunga and Bold's Leech Book, it would appear that complaints of general aches and pains, such as headaches and stomach aches, were common. Both sources offer numerous cures for such illnesses, and some even mention causes or symptoms which may have aided the leech in selecting the best course for treatment. For example, the Lacknunga mentions the illness when one sweats greatly, and Bold's Leech Book a cure for yellow sickness, which comes from an oozing gall. In terms of diagnosing illnesses, there are a few leechdoms that specifically detail symptoms of the disease. However, there is evidence of the Old English inspecting urine of the sick to detect internal bleeding. In one of the ancient Icelandic sagas, a healing woman bid that her patient, having a weapon protruding from his body, drink an aromatic broth, that if she could smell the broth from the wound, she would know which internal organs had been punctured. Bold's first Leech Book suggests a diagnostic test to determine the extent of an illness, stating that,
"If thou wouldest know whether it be neck purulence, take an earthworm entire, lay it on the place where the annoyance is, and wrap it up fast with leaves. If it be neck rattan, the worm turneth to earth. If it be not, he, the patient, will be whole."
There are also several leechdoms which advise the healer based on the results of diagnostic tests. It was known that only the rich or powerful could afford professional healing, and the art itself was very expensive. Bold's Leech Book states, in A Cure for Diarrhea, that if the curative meal provided stay inside the patient, he may be cured. If they escape from him, it advises, it will be better that you do not attend. His death illness is at hand. In an ancient Icelandic saga, in which a wise man pursues Bakthor, He tastes snow covered in Bekthor's blood and proclaims that the bleed is internal and that their target is a dead man. For the most part, the Old English had their own and somewhat fanciful ideas on what the causes of disease were. The most common source of illness was believed to be intrusion or upset from an external source, a classic example being elf shot, where the disease takes the form of a sudden shooting pain and was attributed to elves shooting small darts into the sufferer, human or cattle. The Lacknanga in particular also mentions cures for diseases associated with dwarfs, such as the section titled With Dwarf. Serpents and worms were believed to penetrate the body and cause illnesses. The Old English Herbarium offers several cures for snake bites, and Bald's Leech book for intestinal worms and worms in the stomach. An old Saxon passage of spell healing proclaims, "Go out, worm, go out with 9 little worms, out from the marrow into the bone, from the bone into the flesh, from the flesh into the skin, and from the skin into this arrow." Alongside the occurrence of illnesses of specific causes, the Old English believed that general good health could be maintained by balancing levels of bodily fluids, known then as humours. These humours consisted of blood, phlegm, red bile, and black bile. The humours were arranged in a complex system in which each humour was classified as positive or negative in terms of temperature and moisture, and then arranged into a hierarchy, with blood the highest, as it is warm and moist, thus doubly positive. This hierarchy also represents the dwelling of the humour in the body, as was presumed in the Viking era, with blood in the head being the highest. This concept probably originated from similar Eastern beliefs of the time, and the intention of leeches was to keep the 4 humours in balance. It was generally thought that this was achieved by good, clean living, and that wrongdoing or indulgences led to an increase of one humour beyond that required by the body. This imbalance was believed to be the cause of general or spiritual ill health. In terms of healing, there were 3 general classes that many techniques are classified into. These are knife healing, associated with physical surgery and wound binding; herb healing, the most commonly mentioned in leech books, concerning harnessing the medical healing power of herbs and plants; and spell healing, associated with channeling magical energy, uttering charms or verses, and requesting intervention from the gods. It is important to note that these practices overlap in many leechdoms.
Knife healing formed the solution to the imbalance of humours in a sick patient: bloodletting.
This process involved making small but deep incisions in the target areas of the body and allowing blood to flow from the wound, thus restoring the balance of the humours. The theory behind the practice was based on menstruation. It was the belief of the Old English that a woman bled freely once a month in order to purge the body of bad humours and thus maintain humoral balance. The area of incision and the amount of blood let were determined by the nature of the disease. However, leeches were restricted in the times at which they were permitted to let blood. Although it was commonly used as a cure for a wide range of diseases, section 189 of the Lacknanga manuscript states that
there are 3 days in the year which we call Egyptiaci, on which under no circumstance and out of no need is neither man's or animal's blood to be lessened.
these dangerous days were believed to have been cursed, and bloodletting on these days would cause imminent death. There were other ways of restoring humours, such as inducing vomiting and exercising in order to sweat, although bloodletting was the most common. Another art practiced under the umbrella of knife healing was that of trepanation. This process involved using a sharp instrument to cut through the skin and the bone of the head and remove a small portion of the skull, producing a hole.
Remains from the era show holes of around 2 inches in diameter in the skull. Although there is some evidence of reformation of bone tissue, it is also suggested that many subjects died in surgery.
Knife healing also encompassed the treatment of wounds and fractures. Although sometimes combined with spell healing and herb healing, knife healing would have been the primary technique used in the healing of battle-sustained wounds. In one of the ancient Icelandic sagas, a healing woman proclaims,
"Dangerous seems it to me to receive. This man, who has been implicated in so many slaughters, is himself greatly wounded and needs cure. I therefore invite you, Thor, to stay here as long as you like. I will bind up your wounds and heal you, if it be possible."
A well-known example of knife healing also occurs in the Icelandic sagas.
Then Snorri the priest healed all the sons of Thorbrand. But then Thorod's neck grew together, his head sat somewhat drawn backwards on his trunk, and he said that Snorri would heal him in a maimed man. Snorri said that he deemed the head would come straight when the sinews were knit together, but Thorod would have naught but that which should be torn open again, and the head sat straighter. But all went as Snorri had guessed, and as soon as the sinews were knit together, the head came right.
Spell healing is the most difficult of all the categories to summarise, not because we know so little, but because we have theorised so much.
Evidence from graves resembling objects such as crystal balls, relics, and ritual items such as vials and crosses suggests that the Old English leash may have had many possible afflictions. A shaman, a druid, a witch, a Christian, a pagan, a seer, or an earthbound deity. Despite this, the main role of the leash, using charms and magic, was to invoke the power, energy, or assistance of a certain source. For a shaman, this would involve a journey in a trance-like state to reach another world and to gain the assistance of a spirit guardian in fighting disease. Religious healing, such as that associated with Christianity, would involve requesting the aid of a god or goddess, and general spell healers would have used charms and rituals to control artifacts, herbs, animal matter, and disease causes. The most commonly mentioned in the leech books is the combination of Christian prayer or song to aid herbal or other healing. This may have been because Christianity spans such a large part of the era, but probably had a lot to do with the acceptability of these methods over paganism and witchcraft. It is evident that even from the start of the rise of Christianity, the Church looked less than favourably upon the witchcraft and associated white magic, more so than harmful black magic, as the potential to heal without the intervention of God had the possibility of attracting members away from the Church. It follows, then, that there are many large verses of Christian origin accompanying material leechdoms, such as those that bid,
"God, in your name, God have mercy on us, Lord God, in your assistance."
However, there is also evidence of spell healing using charms and verses to address powers aside from the Christian God. Even those invoking plant or animal energy may have been regarded as acts of magic, frowned upon by priests and members of the Church. Perhaps the most well-known example of spell healing is the 9 herbs charm, a lengthy verse in the Laknunga manuscript that accompanied herb healing, believed to protect travellers and questgoers against disease and such poor fortune. The charm addresses each of the 9 herbs individually, as in, "Remember, mugwort, what you revealed," prior to instruction as to how to apply the herbs. It is a fair theory to suggest that spell healing was not the sole purpose of songs, verses, and charms appearing in some of the leech books. Many leechdoms instruct the healer to say or sing a word or verse a number of times over a boiling pot or resting herb. It could be suggested that these charms were purely to keep important timings in a recipe and acted in the place of a modern-day egg timer. Herb healing is undoubtedly the most common form of healing mentioned in studied texts from the period, with almost every leechdom in the Laknunga and Bald's leech books containing herbal cures, and the Old English Herbarium 5 consisting of 185 chapters on the use of herbs in medicine. This form of healing harnessed the biochemical activity of plants and aimed to use this in order to cure diseases of the body. Some leechdoms involve preparation of the herbs, relevant to the method of application or the nature of the disease. Herbs were crushed, ground, boiled, and burned in order to produce remedies in the form of medicinal drinks, steam baths, and paste for application on the skin, known as salves.
It is not clear where many of these cures originated. Some may have been inferred on a trial and error basis, some from the behaviour of animals, and others from ancient teachings beyond written record. Now we know some of the basic healing techniques used in the ages, we can now answer the question, did it really work?
Arguably the most effective aspect of Viking Age cures was that of suggestive healing. Currently, it is known that the power of suggestion has a huge amount of influence on the body, and particularly can be used to heal by stimulating the mind to allow the body to initiate an immune response. This factor is so strong that clinical trials are required to administer a placebo to a control group of subjects to eliminate the aspect of perceived improvement. Just as the minds of patients today can be fooled into stimulating self-healing of the body, as we trust in trained professionals in white coats and complicated machinery, the Old English may have easily been fooled in the same way by educated leeches with a confident manner of administering treatment. Evidence portrays Old English medicine as involving artifacts such as the leash sax, a healer's knife, probably engraved with runic inscriptions, animal claws and bones, herbs and plants, and flamboyant prayers, charms, and rituals. It is logical to suggest that the patient, trusting in the power of the leash, encouraged and awed by the healing environment, would achieve a state of mind sufficient to enable their body to fight the disease they were afflicted by. In this manner, the patient may have already been on the road to recovery without any actual cure. However, it is reasonable to assume that the actual physiological cures in the form of knife healing and herb healing will have had some impact on the procedure. Some methods of knife healing, such as resetting broken bones and sewing together wounds, seem practical in the circumstance, and, although not performed in the familiar, strict and safe manner, are similar to procedures today. Trepanation, the art of drilling holes in the skull, is actually still utilized in brain surgery today, with the removal of small areas of the skull and the brain, although the bone is often replaced nowadays rather than relying on regrowth. The alternative is to access the brain via a needle in the eye socket. Trepanning is used in pseudoscience voluntarily in order to reduce cranial pressure and blood volume. The reliability of herb healing, however, is much more debatable. Scientific study today tells us that herbal medicines can be successfully used for many types of disease, and developed medicines generally tend to originate from organic compounds in plant extracts. The most famous example of this is the manufacture of aspirin from willow bark. Willow was found to alleviate pain and is mentioned in the leechdoms for headaches, pain in joints, bones, and the spleen. We can assume that all of these cures would have been most effective due to the biochemical power of acetylsalicylic acid. Potentilla raptans, a 10th century Anglo-Saxon herb used for wound healing, was studied by F. Watkins and Co., aiming to determine its antimicrobial effects. The study concluded that the herb showed mild antibiotic properties and attributed this to the high ethanol content in the extracts from its roots. It was likely that this herb was effective for treating wounds and preventing infection. It is quite evident that leeches were knowledgeable about areas of reproduction. Although midwifery was not a commonly recorded practice, perhaps due to the male-dominant state of society, leechdoms advised that pregnant women should be refused alcohol and overly sweet or fatty foods, and not allowed to travel too far or too vigorously on a horse, advice which is commonly given to pregnant women today. Indeed, treatment for women whose menstrual flow is too strong appears to have been derived from the symptoms of menopause. Sweating is induced in an attempt to reduce menstruation. Leeches seemingly assumed that sweating due to menopause was associated with the stemming of the menstrual flow. Clever assumption, if not entirely correctly inferred. Leechdoms which recommend consumption of foodstuff, such as butter, thick porridge, and certain meats, may be highly valid. Nutritionists today study the nutrient value of foods and claim that the ingestion of such nutrients from food or via nutritional supplements may prevent or even cure some ailments. Salt, known to have the ability to kill microbial cells, was also utilized by leeches, both to eat and to apply to wounds. The use of wine or ale as a base for curative drinks is also widespread among leech books, and no doubt it was an important part of life for many. Evidence today suggests that drinking alcohol in moderation leads to many health benefits, including reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and dementia, as well as lengthening life. There are numerous areas of Viking medicine which conflict greatly with modern scientific study. Bloodletting, one of the most generic and favoured practices for the relief of a wide range of diseases, is now known to be harmful to the patient because of the increased susceptibility to infection. Blood is generally only removed now for testing, dialysis or donation. Some scientists and other experts studying the best evidence sources of leechcraft, such as the Lacknanger and Bold's leech books, look very critically upon the use to which healers of the Viking era put herbal resources to. Charles Singer described the Lacknanger work as the final pathological disintegration of the great system of Greek medical thought. And indeed, it seems to be a popular thought that further international healing techniques were more advanced than those of the English for the same time.
Some cures, it may be said, seem utterly ridiculous and hugely beyond the superior knowledge of healthcare we have today. For example, a concoction of hound's tongue and mice's blood was undoubtedly useless in the context it was prescribed.
However, such ingredients may have been effective in maintaining the placebo effect. A lot of Viking medicine appears to be associated with superstition, in that certain herbs must be harvested in particular ways or at particular times, and animal matter was very specifically chosen. The notion of paying such care and attention to the ingredients would only have increased the power of suggestive healing invoked by the leech.
Conclusively, although there is obviously a limit to the amount of evidence that we can gather, and some professionals' opinions on the matter can be no more than educated guesswork, I think it is apparent that Viking healing techniques were not as bizarre nor as obscene as they may seem.
The subject of leechcraft is fascinating, as indeed are many aspects of Old English life. Understanding the motivation behind their systems reveals that not only were the Vikings and the Saxons intelligent, but that we may also learn a lot from their simple but effective techniques.